Hello everyone. I'm Matthew Handrahan, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz, a really excellent website that you should all be reading on a daily basis. I'd like to introduce you all to Hilmar Veigar from CCP Games. CCP Games I've been a journalist for about 12 years, and CCP Games for that entire time has been one of the most interesting companies out there. The reason why is a game I'm sure you're all familiar with, EVE Online. There was nothing like it around when it first launched, and there's really still not an awful lot like it now. In terms of virtual worlds, persistent universes, this kind of blazed a trail, and it's one that others have found very, very hard to follow. On one level, it's a game about spaceships and exploration and mining and trade and things, but it's also about, I mean, if you've ever read any of the stories, because journalists love to write about this game, it's about revenge and sabotage, and these storylines, which are all generated by the community, play out over long periods of time, days and weeks, and in some very extreme cases, years as well, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. And, you know, and in these battles, and there are massive, massive battles, you know, spaceships and virtual items that are worth real money, like tens of thousands of dollars, can just disappear. And the nature of EVE is that once it's gone, it's gone. As I say, there's really not an awful lot out there that's like it, and I think that's why the players value it so much. So the thing, obviously, is that Hilmar and his team at CCP have been thinking about virtual worlds and virtual economies, how to balance them, how to sustain them for, you know, at least 13 years. I mean, I know that CCP's going since 1997, right, when it was founded?
Yeah, yeah. CCP turned 20 years old this month.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the EVE is fairly well established. It's quite a long introduction to a game many of you probably have played, some of you still probably play today. But it's not a game that's stopped changing. I know that in the past I've talked to Hilmar, and the motto he's told me is adapt or die, basically. That's kind of how they guide the product. And so just to give you an idea, because you know, anyone who's creating a world of any kind can learn a lot from what CCP has done with EVE, how, like I say, how to balance it and sustain it and create something that people want to come back to. And I don't think it needs to be a big MMO either. But so just to give you an idea of the kind of changes that need to happen, the thinking behind it, I wanted to focus in on a couple of more recent things. Two very big changes to the EVE universe. One was called Ascension. EVE was a subscription MMO at launch, and it remained a subscription MMO for a long, long time. Was one of the ones that kind of survived like a massive crash in subscription MMOs when free-to-play rose up. But Ascension added a free tier, right? So what need were you trying to address there? What was the thinking behind it, and what's been the outcome?
So when we started EVE Online, then it was very traditional to sell a box up front. So you had to pay your traditional $60 to buy a box, which included a CD key that gives you 30 days of playtime, and then you would have to enter your credit card for subscription. Yeah. This was kind of the state of MMO in 2003 when we released. At the same time when that was occurring, there were several MMOs and virtual worlds in Asia, mainly Korea, which had various different type of business models. They started first by paying by the hour in PC banks, and then they kind of innovated free-to-play. I always kept an eye out on what was going on, especially in Korea, mentally thinking what is happening there will be my reality 5 years from now. Yeah. That was just my sense of the vibrancy of kind of innovation and speed of gaming culture over there compared to the West.
I think many in the industry would felt the same way. I've talked to many people.
Maybe not so many at the time. Yeah. I think what was happening over there was generally frowned upon because it was not AAA or for some other reasons. But in any case, I was super interested in that. But you have to go with a business model that makes sense to people. Immediately what we saw when we released EVE Online is that people wanted to pay and progress in a much more varied spectrum than what we wanted to do. We wanted to sell the game in subscription. Immediately, day one, we saw a vibrant economy on eBay where people were selling aftermarket virtual goods, making a living out of playing the game. So people were going from paying the $15 subscription charge. Some people were paying the subscription charge by selling their goods on eBay, and some people were just making a profit on selling their goods on eBay. So already the user base kind of voted on what they wanted to do, which is a much more wider spectrum than what we were prepared for. So we were either faced with the challenge, either we're going to fight the behavior, the natural preference of our player base, or we're going to find a way to make it work for everyone. So we immediately started thinking about, okay, now that we kind of understand these dynamics, how can we embrace them? So as early, I think, as 2004, we started to introduce what was called the electronic time code exchange, which is you could basically buy a code that represented 1 month of subscription in the game. Then you can take that code and sell it to another player, usually for currency inside the game. And this was first mainly done to address the fact we didn't offer a lot of billing options, and particularly players in Germany didn't want to pay with credit cards. So there were German providers of using German-specific payment option, mainly direct debit at the time, which we didn't have integrated. They bought electronic codes from us, resold it to players, but then players also bought the code and used them to buy more currency in the game. So instead of using your time to generate in-game currency, you bought an electronic game time code, which you traded with another player for the currency they had earned.
Yeah.
So this we started in 2004, and immediately it kind of took off, and it was not very kind of transactionally sound and etc. So there was a bit of fraud involved. And that really, coupled with actually an inspiration from a Chinese game called Westward Journey 3 from NetEase, became the foundation of the Plex system, which we then released in 2008. And it was, I think, hugely innovative at the time. I think now most virtual worlds have adopted a similar concept. So immediately as we kind of co-opted and formalized that, then for all practical purposes, a substantial number of the EVE players paid for the game by playing the game.
By playing the game, yeah.
So in a way, the game was free to play as of 2008. You just needed to have enough cash flow inside the game to pay for a Plex, to pay for a subscription. So really what we were doing last year in November was really just formalizing that system in a better way, where you didn't have to know about the intrinsics of the economy to understand this up front. You would just approach the game as practically any game is, which is a game as a service today. They're all free to play to some extent. So this was more us just simplifying and formalizing a business model already in place. Now that the concept of a game being free and you paying as you go has been kind of culturally adopted in the West.
Yeah, and importantly, that whole idea kind of arose naturally, organically from your player base as well. Like this is something that they indicated they wanted through their own behaviour, and you just recognised that and then you gave it back to them, which I think is kind of a sound process to apply to managing any community of players.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, the other thing you've done is also relates to in-game currencies. I know the virtual currencies is a sort of a favourite subject of yours, I believe.
Yeah. So when you're faced with the challenge of basically running an economy, then a lot of running and balancing an economy is about how is new money introduced, how is money supply managed, how is work in the economy rewarded, and what do you do with the people that hold a lot of assets. So you can look at how this is solved in reality, solved in online, and I think what's super innovative right now is how it's solved in the cryptocurrency world. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the real economy, which we all think we know, and I think we do to some extent, it's just the sociological phenomenon that is the concept of money is ever changing, and especially once money was taken off a gold footing, which kind of made it grokkable what money is. When it was related to gold.
It's virtual to an extent now anyway, right?
Yeah, but as soon as they broke the gold connection, then money has been set loose upon the world in a dynamic sense that I think is mathematically and sort of programmatically understood, But when you add a collective human emotional chaos into it, I think it's extremely poorly understood what it really does on a long-term basis. And I think we now live in a world where money, frankly, is about to die because it's not serving its core purpose. We now live in a world where the richest, 1% has more than half of all the money in the world. And we live in a world with rewards, holding money and risking your money, which in some ways work in the economy, but it's a very specific type of work that relates to just holding capital and redeploying it, which is important, but it's extremely highly valued. So when people are talking about passive income, frankly, the people that own a lot of money in the current economy have already a passive income stream because there are so many facilities to leverage capital in the world, especially if you own a lot of it. You can diversify your portfolio in a way you're almost guaranteed a passive income. And then you have people that do work in the economy, but their work doesn't directly correlate or relate to the money itself. So I would say we have an economic system which is pretty broken. People are revolting all over the world about the inequalities and the mismanagement of the currency systems. So we need something better.
I mean, so is this mirrored in Eve? Is the broken real economy mirrored in Eve's virtual economy, or is that you're trying to avoid it getting to that state by changing the way it works?
We're trying to avoid getting to that state, but it's freaking hard. So I have some sympathy for people that try to manage economies. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just pointing out it's easy to watch the real economy from afar, point out flaws in it when I'm not responsible for fixing it.
Well, no, but I think the Eve players tend to get quite angry when you do things wrong as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we have made many mistakes in managing the economy. That's how you learn how to do it.
There's been a few revolts in Eve.
Absolutely.
I know that much.
But I think what we enjoy in Eve is we just have an accelerated pace of evolution because of the feedback loop that we enjoy with the players. But in any case, if you look at Eve, Eve works a little differently than the real economy, is that we're adding new money into the economy all the time. So it's kind of a very traditional sort of faucet and sink system where we add money into the economy and we sink money out of the economy. So generally we try to manage how much is put in and how much is taken out such that the money supply is in some way under control. Because if you increase the money supply too much, you devalue the money in the system. So it's a tricky balance. So that's how we do it. If you look at cryptocurrencies, they've been able to pull off validating what is valuable work in the economy, which is mainly the act of mining, which is more or less cryptographically sound. It's also more or less uncheatable, the work part, because it requires solving math, which has not yet been broken and probably won't be broken until we have quantum processors. So it's a function of ingenuity and electricity to do work in the economy to make it work. And through that, you get paid out of making the economy work. I am particularly interested in that because it also includes an element of scaling. So the difficulty of doing the work scales with time and with volume. And when you look at those foundational dynamics of cryptocurrencies, and you look at the foundational dynamics of what it is to run a virtual economy, here you have a mathematically sound, decentralized way of validating, authenticating that work has occurred, is not duplicated, and then you can transform transactions on top of it. This took us years to get right in Eve. Like to stand up Eve on top of transactional databases, to validate these properties, which we spent the first 5 years just making, hardening, and to a point where they've mostly stood up since. This is the core foundational work on standing up a single-sharded MMO. On that we have then built on top of, and that's been going on for 14 years. Now, when I look at a system like this, what our current system is, and the rather faulty system we have in reality, I want to see and find out ways how can I harvest this innovation to make our economies more equipped to be an even better alternative to the relatively flawed system of reality.
So, but when you're making these changes, when you're introducing these ideas, because these are, I mean, you obviously think very deeply about this subject, but not all of your players are going to. I mean, so when you do make these kinds of changes, and maybe this will be of kind of broad relevance to people managing communities of all kinds, how do you deal with an idea that not everybody who plays your game will really have thought about the long-term consequences of? Something that you see value in, but maybe your players don't instinctively, but they feel entitled to have their say.
Okay, so I think the general phrase is changing anything on the internet is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So you have to start with the premise that any change will never satisfy everyone. So you will always have a group of people that just won't like the change, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's no change that I think we've done in EVE. Some changes have been very successful that everyone was happy with when they were introduced. So you have to start there. Then you have to have a clear idea on really where you want to go, and I think it's good to communicate that idea. A lot of the people in your community will have thought deeply about it. They will give you constructive feedback on where you want to go, and they will onboard parts of it. Well, you have to onboard their feedback. You have to make changes to the overall direction. They will then, once they have onboarded it, help with introducing the concept to the rest, because they will have a different context to discuss it in, and they will also have a different incentives than we do. I mean, we're ultimately running a company that is damn hard to begin with. A lot of that involves managing risk and getting growth, so that's our incentives. People in the economy have different incentives, so you have to understand that. And then, once you have kind of established that framework, then it's making small, decisive changes every step of the way, not try to do all the changes in one go. We have tried to do that, that just doesn't work. People revolt to that idea, and I've just found this, you might think you're smart enough to think through all the angles, but you're just not. Yeah. So as you take the steps, knowing where you want to go, and you have to adjust every step of the way, and of course, where you want to go, adjust a little bit every step of the way.
And working with that core part of your community as you go as well, always getting that feedback and making sure.
Always getting the feedback, listen, understand really where it's coming from. It might sound that people are not getting it or they're not believing in it, but usually you can find where they're coming from. And once you have found that, then you can mold that into where you're coming from. And somewhere in between lies the logical next step. Yeah.
I mean, so do you think, because one thing that when writing my introduction, the one thing that occurred to me is that EVE does, in my opinion, have the most engaged players of any game. I mean, we're at a time when we've got so much data about games that terms like retention and engagement have become quite commonplace. And I've often think they're kind of abstracted from what those words used to mean in a way. And you can see the way that EVE's players are engaged by the actions they take, by the narratives they create with each other, by the incredible feats that they perform as a community, as a unit. I mean, so do you think that with EVE you're in a privileged position because you have these players that really are working for your game in a way that perhaps you wouldn't get with a mobile game or almost any other game, really?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to look at your own situation and contrast to others, because you don't really know what is the reality of another game or another way of doing things. You might think you know, but I just know from doing it, you don't really know. Yeah. So what you're describing is a situation that gives and takes. Yeah. It's extremely hard to work with a passionate player base like the EVE Online community is. It's also extremely rewarding when we get it right and are able to push EVE Online to yet another year, to yet another unlock in its potential. So I really just try to focus on our own situation. Mm-hmm. I look at other situations just to learn from them, just like I was talking about in the beginning. Looking towards Asia, particularly Korea in the early 2000s, was a very sort of fertile ground of innovation. I'm now, like I'm saying, we're exploring virtual reality, we're exploring a little bit into this cryptocurrency domain to bring back knowledge on how we can evolve our craft to make that thing even stronger. So I mean, the simple answer to your question is yes. I feel like we're in a privileged position because we're still here. We've been operating on the sometimes bleeding edge of technology and innovation, and that's hard to do. And doing that for 20 years, and still being around, and still being with a chance in hand, as I say to myself and our company, like our best work is ahead of us. To still feel like that after 20 years, I feel privileged by that.
So there's not ever going to be a point where you no longer need to make changes to EVE Online, where you no longer need to kind of hold its hand and make sure it goes forward, that it's never just going to exist in perfect harmony purely on the actions of its community.
I can imagine a utopia where that happens. But I've just learned from doing it, and also just in seeing the rate of external change you have to react to, that equipping a virtual world with the facilities to correctly evolve itself, I've not figured out how to do that.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, we do less and less hand-holding for sure. But there is almost like a custodian responsibility, which I think is going to be hard to take human intelligence out of. Maybe when our AI overlords have become so much smarter, they can take over. I don't think that time is coming anytime soon.
So I can only imagine that you do think about how AI overlords might improve EVE Online in the future, though, right?
Currently we're struggling with the human overlords part, or the human custodian part.
Indeed. Well, one of the things I've always really liked, I mean, having talked to CCP many times over the years, and I can say there's definitely the people that work there, they kind of just love watching the chaos unfold in EVE Online sometimes. You know, when players seem to be out there just to destroy things and cause trouble, that actually brings people that work for your company like a great deal of pleasure. You know, that's kind of the point of what they create.
So, I mean, what we want to do is to do enough of foundational systems so that the players can take care of the rest, and that then becoming theirs. Like they own the narrative, they own their wars, they own their agenda. So we have a certain responsibility, and then we leave a lot of room for people to make up the rest. And that gives sort of purpose and autonomy in a way that makes us passionate about what we do. Doing the solution where you just control everything and you provide a curated experience where there's very little room for user innovation, I mean, is important, and there are games that are awesome like that. That's just not the stance we've taken. We've taken the stance of, we're going to go this far, and we're hopefully inspire the players, and they inspire each other and us to take it then to some extreme position we can't even think of. So every time that happens, we feel like we've done our job. Every time we feel like we need to bootstrap it and kickstart it and do something like that, I feel like we're not doing our job.
Well, I mean, because this is one of the, one of the interesting things about EVE is it's a virtual world in a truer sense than, say, a more scripted MMO might be, one that's kind of based on lore written by people, because there is a sense of participation to it that you don't really get elsewhere. I would like to talk a little bit more about virtual worlds in general, just like the bigger picture of what's happening at the moment. I mean, one of the big stories of recent times in tech has been Improbable, which makes makes a technology for generating physics-based virtual worlds, which was really pitched as a games technology, and then quite recently it raised $506 million, I think, in funding, which kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I just had it in my head that this was something for games. And what it made me think is just how commonplace are virtual worlds going to become in the future? I mean, do you think forward to that as someone who's spent 13, 14 years thinking about creating virtual worlds, balancing virtual economies, like how that concept at the moment is really a games-based one? What's it going to look like in the future, do you think?
So my first job out of university was actually working for a VRML startup in Iceland. VRML, for those that were not around or have forgotten, was a virtual reality modeling language, poised to be the 3D version of the internet, basically implementing snow crash as Neil Stephenson described it in his book. or the Metaverse, as described in Stonecross. So I come from the general solve. We founded CCP, coming from that company, to make it more in the context of a game, because we saw it as a practical way to make it happen, because getting gamers involved in that to us was an easier proposition than trying to get everyone involved in that. Gamers in general are quick to adopt new technology concepts, etc. Gaming has driven CPU and GPU innovation, internet adoption. Gaming has driven a lot of technologies to come to be. So it's not unfamiliar to me to go between the two layers of Evenline is a game, Evenline is a virtual world, Evenline is a social economy. Mm-hmm. So we're generally think about it in those layers, and ultimately we were describing EVE as a virtual world way before I think the term is even generally practiced. We were usually classified as an MMORPG, and we kind of owned that classification because that was the most relevant one at the time. Mm-hmm. But if you compare your typical MMORPG to Evenline, you will immediately see there are some fundamental differences, where Evenline, I would say, is more of an economy social world, mostly due to the single-shardedness and the way sort of trading and value is created and arbitrated and all those things we talked about earlier. So when you see something like Improbable, and I've known Herman and the guys for years, so and I wish them the very best of luck. It would be really good for games if somebody goes and solves the hard problem of doing this, because I know from doing a specific proprietary version of it how hard that is, and it took a lot of energy, and Evenline would be stronger in other elements if we would not have had to spend so much time in starting up the core basic simulation tech of it. So if there exists a technology like Improbable in the world, where you can just solve the simulation part with a platform or a middleware, just like you can solve now 3D engines with Unreal or Unity, that is a good thing. Now that they have $500 million to do it, it probably increases their odds of succeeding. It might also decrease them. It's hard to have so much money when you're
far from a
tackling
sure thing, even with half $500 billion.
But what I like is that they are very focused on games as the first use case. I think that's smart. I think games, to the earlier point, games are good at driving technology innovation and those kind of agenda forwards, because gamers are innovators at heart and willing to embrace new exciting things and drive them forward. So I think that's smart. So I think it's a good thing that somebody like SoftBank is willing to back such a ballsy bet with so much money to make it happen. Whatever comes of that, I think we will push the agenda forward.
Yeah, but I think it's quite an exciting time, because you do have, because it's not, Improbable is trying to come up with this platform for creating these persistent worlds, which could allow people to become much more ambitious in how they think about games and beyond, indeed. VR is another thing that is kind of here now, and CCP was one of the first companies to really embrace it. You had Valkyrie, you've had Gunjack, you've got Spark coming up, which is one of is it the first game you've released outside the EVE universe?
Yes,
yeah,
that is.
It is. So anyway, so you've really supported it from the beginning, and I think now I've just heard about your first job outside of university. I can kind of see why. That's probably been a long time coming for you, right? So how does that all fit in, and where do you see VR going?
So we joined the mission of making the current wave of VR a reality, I think on August 24th, 2012. That's when we backed the Kickstarter of Oculus. Yep. So we got some of the first kits, and immediately we had people just naturally at the company making prototypes and playing around with it. And out of that came EVR, a little prototype of a spaceship experience we took to FanFest 2013. Then to E3, then to Gamescom, voila, and we have Valkyrie, which is probably the biggest VR bet so far. Yeah. And we did that just because this thing was very culturally aligned, relates to our origins, something that the whole company from top to bottom is passionate about. So we went into it with that in mind. we also went into it with a mind, okay, here's a massive tech disruption that's going to go through ups and downs before it's over.
Yep.
So let's be careful about what we do. I think we have managed our investments pretty well. I think we have more or less kind of estimated install bases at each of the different phases correctly. I know now when we're in the, what is it called, the thorough of disillusionment for tech disruption.
Yep.
We had probably peak hype at some point in 16.
Yeah.
And now we're in the thorough of disillusionment in 17.
Yes, because these ups and downs are one of the things that really interest me, because we are in a down point at the moment. I don't know what people quite expected would happen in the first proper year of having high-end VR on the market, but it obviously didn't quite meet many people's expectations, I suppose. But that's how you view it then. This is just when you looked ahead, when you thought ahead with VR, you kind of saw that this would happen and that there's going to be an upswing.
Yeah, I mean, we predicted there's going to be an upswing and a downswing, which is not some savant insight. That always happens. Timing those is the hard part, and I think we're officially going through the hype, and we're somewhere in the thorough of it. And the properties of a thorough, I think that there's an up following
there has
that.
To be another side.
Yeah, and I know that from having gone through a few tech disruptions myself. In the VRML world, it was the internet, and it took a while for the internet to become a thing. And there we're talking about the internet, which is pretty important. Mobile gaming was another, and 3D card accelerators was another. All of these things went to very similar peaks and valleys, especially mobile games. I remember going to GDC from 2001 to 3, 4, 5. Mobile gaming was going to be big. At the time, ringtones were a bigger business than mobile games. Then 2007, iPhone comes out, sells 3 million copies, just to put things into perspective. VR is already exceeded that level if you add up all the VR headsets sold. So currently we have more VR players than we had mobile phone players at iPhone feature level. So if you just put it in the perspective of what it takes to do something as disruptive as VR, I think it's going, quite well. It's not saying it's easy, and it isn't hard, and we have to still be extremely careful about how we invest in it. But the core fundamentals of why we went into it, I think, are still true, and that's why we keep doing and backing what we're doing in terms of Valkyrie and Gunjack and releasing new things like Spark.
Yeah.
So, and I think as we move through the months remaining this year and into 18, we will start to kind of see rational expectations, rational projections, more linear thinking about how it's going to work out.
Yeah.
And this will be an extremely robust environment 3 years from now.
Yeah. So what do you think are the big obstacles now? Phil Spencer from Microsoft gave an interview at E3 recently, which he said that basically Microsoft's not really going to look at this for games until you haven't got a big wire hanging out the back of your head. Like, he thinks that's the thing. I've heard people talk about that there's a...
He sentit a gent parlar de que ho comparen amb que...
That was kind of considered quite, bad manners to like text at the dinner table, or there was a sort of a social aspect that people had to get used to. That's just holding a phone like this. This is wearing a huge, head-mounted device on your face.
Yeah.
So are there things that need to change for it to grow, for that upswing to occur?
Yeah, I think there are mainly two things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, we can go into wires and pixels and weight and ergonomics and all that, which I think is relatively, just pace of innovation is going to solve that at some point. Right now, I think it's two things. It's the price, and it's the availability of great experiences. And when you look at any of the tech disruption, these are usually the catalysts. Going back to my iPhone example, it wasn't really until the iPhone solved the price thing by doing built-in contracts, which was a way for people to get an iPhone without having to fork up what it was in the beginning. It was similar to a VR headset today, I think. And right now you have to be a big believer to fork out the amount of money needed to just go and test it out. So, and then, I mean, there are some great experiences, but there's not a lot. There's a lot of experiences, not many of them I would call great.
Yeah.
There's some good ones, there are some bad ones, but the great ones, we need more of that. So I think by working more on the price, you will increase the install base, and maybe not too much focused on changing the spec, because that also invalidates all the experiences that have been done already. And I think there are millions of people which are curious to try, just not at the current cross-section of price up front to what you can really do with it. So I think working on this equation is the important bit to do over the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
To really just have more people get the taste. Because what we have seen, that once people get a taste and they find this is something they enjoy doing, they do it quite a lot. We have people play Valkyrie just as much as people play online.
Yeah.
So I mean, everything, all the fears about like you can't do it for a long time, you can't do it repeatedly, etc., they're just not true. We just need more people to get that, and for that to happen, we need to lower the price barrier.
Yeah. I mean, so when does AR come into the picture for you? I mean, because they're often talked about as fairly different things. I've also heard people say that eventually one device is going to do both of them anyway, so there's not really that much of a meaningful difference.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of conflating of like VR, AR, MR, XR. Mm-hmm. I don't know where to stop with the definition.
Yeah.
And everyone has their very precise definition of what is some way of not reality thing. So I lose motivation to try to understand everyone's terminologies at some point. But you could almost think of a spectrum of, okay, here's VR, and here is Snapchat filters.
Yeah.
So this is probably the lowest touch thing, the most adopted. Here's the deepest end of the pool where we're currently mostly operating. So you go from that spectrum, and somewhere in that spectrum you have AR glasses on your face.
Yeah.
That case, I think on a consumer level, I think that's pretty far away, because there you are really into social acceptance, price, what is it really?
Yeah.
There's a lot of fantastical expressions on YouTube on what AR is. I've tried a lot of AR glasses,
mm-hmm.
And the experience is not as the same as it's made to be when you watch an AR video of something displayed as a video.
It's not as immediately impressive as VR is, certainly. It's not that kind of overwhelming, truly immersive experience.
No, but again, to the spectrum, I think these things are going to evolve. I think VR is a documented thing that people are doing, and doing at relatively interesting scale. Certainly the Snapchat filters and video overlays and alternate reality on a phone where you just hold it and do things like that is happening, and people are doing that on a massive scale. Somewhere in between this meets into something where we, I don't know, 20 years from now have replacement eyeballs, and we have all forgotten what it used to be not to have them.
Yeah.
What happens in that interim? I think we're going to stay relatively bifurcated in these two angles. I mean, we're currently mostly here. Of course, we pay attention to what's going on here, and here in the middle where we have the glasses, which I think will have a thriving reality, a business reality in sort of a business-to-business environment. I think Microsoft is doing very smart things with the HoloLens.
Yep.
I think there are just a lot of businesses that have
Ya
immediate
inicia la
return
ponencia
on
de Sam
investment
Lake, de Rey de
criteria to go and buy some
Entertainment,
HoloLenses
responsable de los grandes
and
éxitos
solve their
Max
weird
Payne, Alan Wake y Quantum Break.
case
Su
that
ponencia se titula Nuevas formas
they
de contar
have
historias.
just
Y en
less
paralelo, en la
errors,
Sala
quicker
Liberty
training,
inicia momentos la charla de
empower
DELCAT,
people more to do
Asociación
their
de
task
Desarrollo
at
de
the company.
Cataluña.
Well, I
Gracias.
think this is an important point. I mean, we will probably have time for one or two questions, so do think about if you have anything to ask Hilmar before we close. But so games are just one part of this, right? I mean, VR and AR, they're a platform. It's like, you know, it's the iPhone is not a gaming device, but it led to the rise of the biggest games marketplace that we've ever known.
Yep.
So games fit into it somewhere. And in all of this discussion, one thing that comes through is that you know, CCP as a company has been thinking about techniques and processes and ideas that actually they apply to games, but they're not specifically about games. So virtual worlds, becoming more and more ubiquitous. Virtual economy is becoming more and more ubiquitous. You're working with VR technology, AR's coming through. I mean, do you see CCP's future as always being in games? Because there seems to be the lines between the game and other forms of entertainment, they seem to be blurring all the time.
I think we do our best work at the kind of intersection of where a game goes and where a kind of a virtual world kind of begins.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can take the virtual world thing to an extreme where you have some chat room functionality, something which we're not interested in. You can have games in their extreme where they're really just a single player puzzle, which is interesting, but not where we do our best work. So our best work is at the intersection of these phenomenon. Sometimes we go further into games, sometimes we go further into virtual worlds. So living in this kind of, I'm from Iceland, we are acutely familiar with marine biology, where like the hot water and the cold water meet, that's where all the interesting action is in the ocean. Yeah. So these intersection of these two phenomenons is what I like our company to kind of serve in, going in a little bit back and forth, because you need to learn about things, bring them back to the cold front. Yep. So that's how I think about it. So I don't see these things as binary and mutually exclusive. I see them as a gradient from these two poles, and I would like to kind of surf in the middle. Yeah. That's where the most power and dynamic is. Yeah,
and as you say, your best years are still ahead of you, right?
Totally.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, I mean, we've got, I think, a few minutes, so maybe one or two questions. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask Hilmar? This guy or that one?
Hello. I wanted to ask, earlier you mentioned how the real world economy is broken in some aspects, and as someone who has fixed an economy, my question would be, what would you do in the real world to make it better, and what lever would you use?
So my plan for making the real world better is to make a better virtual world, and thus inspire fixes in the real world. If I were to go and fix the real world, I would have to go and be a prime minister of a country and try to do it like that, which I'm actually not very interested in. I am more interested in just doing a better version from the ground up. Looking at the real world and having opinions on how to fix it without having the responsibility of doing it does not really interest me. That's like throwing stones out of a glass house. It's hard enough to make my own version good. I want to focus on that rather than sort of point and laugh at the other system, which is not great at the moment.
So I think Hilmar just wants us all to go and live in the Matrix if we don't like that. I think we had another one over here.
Hi, here Ángel Sucasas from newspaper El País. My question is a question about design. When we have better haptic control for virtual reality and the movements and reactions of the player become more natural, this supposes a change in the philosophy of the design, because in the past we have to associate one button with one action, and in the future we're going to have much more natural and complex movements doing much more easily. So in that point of view, it gives you as a designer more freedom to try new things in the future?
Yeah, so our upcoming game Spark is our first entry really into this, where Spark is better described as a virtual sport than a computer game in the traditional sense. So what we're focusing on in Spark is having fine-grained motor control over multiple muscles of your body gives you an advantage in the game. So the game is a lot. It involves throwing a virtual projectile of sorts, and then you have a shield in your hand which you can bounce off. It's actually pretty cool. and you can do like spin on the ball, you can low ball, you can bounce the ball. So I have just been in that experience, mastering my craft of throwing a virtual ball for hours. And it's extremely satisfying. I'm like a kid with a ball for the first time. And there you start to understand engaging more muscles and control of your body rewards your brain differently than just doing like this or just doing like this. So getting kind of the whole central nervous system to unlock, to go and do something, gives you an amazing feeling of empowerment. And it also is good for just getting people to move, which is also a good thing. So this is our first sort of foray into that. I know from that we will learn something, which we then can probably take to more of the sort of economical things I was talking about earlier, where actually using your whole body to do something will power a virtual world in the future.
Well, I think that's all we have time for, so if you'd like to give Hilmar a big round of applause.